Everybody, we don't have Arjun. Now it's going to be like self-organized meeting. Do we have agenda, guys?
We do.
I've got a couple of things that I might just foreshadow because we've been playing around with the minimal subset of FHIR and the shareable profile and what that means and all the rest. And we've just sort of found a few sort of gaps, I think, potentially in the spec. So we haven't actually written them up properly as issues yet, but we might collect up a few, write them up, and maybe a future meeting we can try and figure them out. But I can sort of talk to some of them if you like.
Yeah. And we saw that Brian started support of ViewDefinition runners in a FHIR, and I think we should use API for that. We can discuss with Brian probably on dev days.
So is he using which implementation?
So
JavaScript.
Yeah, he is using JavaScript and he just embedded it inside. But I think we should discuss with him to have an API so we can plug and play different engines. And that's one topic. Yeah, another topic.
A question on that, guys. I should probably ask Brian. Is there for plugging into his FHIR lab? Is there an API, a defined API for that?
Not yet, but I think we may use our $run operation and recommend Brian to do this. Especially, I implemented this $run for JavaScript reference implementation. I will ask Brian how he built it into. Maybe he is already using, but I'm not sure.
Because I looked for the predecessor to that, which is just the FHIR. Each of those FHIR path engines are using a consistent. They're about providing a consistent API, including ABUX. Do you know where that consistent API is defined?
It is completely inconsistent.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Everything is ad hoc. We're still waiting for half-year to get forms merged into Brian FHIR lab, and for FHIR it's like 3 implementation which are almost hard-coded inside. There is no API to do that, but maybe we can discuss with Brian this part as well. So Brian used something like embedded because it's a different platforms, and so I don't know how he is running, but we may have a discussion about this.
Could you use a server that supports the SQL and FHIR API to power just the FHIR path bit?
Potentially, yes. Why not? So
yeah, I'm just wondering because the other part of the FHIR path lab. Well, there's 3 parts. There's the FHIR path, there's the SDC part, and now there's the view runner.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice if it could all just be powered by FHIR server API.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah. But I was just wondering how that would work for just the single expression FHIR path evaluation.
Like our $run. So you may send parameter with a resource and the FHIR path expression and get the result back. I know that Brian is working on annotated errors and all this stuff like validating FHIR path. So for now, few engines can return IST and errors which are validating that the FHIR path is valid against structure definitions. We discussed this one, but probably we can maybe on dev days we can discuss with Brian to introduce some APIs like $run for FHIR path. Essentially, you can do this with our engine. You can just put ViewDefinition with one FHIR path expression and the one resource. So
yeah, a bit of a hack, but it probably does work.
Yeah, but there could be much simpler API for that. Yeah, but it should be kind of standardized API. And for me, I was thinking maybe a topic from my side is discuss, should we still distinguish $run and $evaluate? Because we can do similar stuff what we decided with the export. So you can send the URL or ViewDefinition resource and the get result. And we can do the same with just keeping run operation, not distinguishing run and evaluate. Just to remind, in evaluate, we are sending the body of the ViewDefinition, yes, and run using server-defined ViewDefinition. Maybe just having one operation is better than having 2 operations. And they will be uniformly with the export operation.
Yeah. How much it's always been tricky to try and figure out how much to put into one operation, how much to separate them out. And yeah, I think I kind of worked out that there was like 3 sort of axes of different things that we needed there, and yeah, it's just deciding where to split is kind of a little bit tricky. But I guess once you start duplicating parameters the same across different operations, it starts to give you the vibe that perhaps these shouldn't be separate operations.
Yeah. And for run and evaluate, so the response is the same. So it's a real-time response, like a streaming result. And the only difference that like, are you providing the view definition as a body, or are you like sending the reference? It can be hidden like instance level operation, which is like kind of sugar, but I think they very similar, evaluate and again, so I like the decision we did for experts. We have a like parameter with a view definition as a resource or as a reference. We can do completely the same with run, and like people, if they know one operation, they understand another operation, and just one is asynchronous and another is synchronous.
So 2 parameters, one that's a reference and one that's a view definition.
Yeah.
Because you can use contained resources as well, right?
What do you mean contained?
Like contained view definition and reference to it.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess there's one way of doing it is that you have a view definition which is typed view definition, I guess, though we might have some problems with that, and then have another one which is like view definition references, which is like an array of references. The other way is you just have the view definition references, and instead of being a URL, it's just like a #1 or something, and that view definition is actually contained in the parameters resource. But the problem with that is that, so in the first, or you can have like a post body as well, I guess, but or something like that. And I guess in the first instance, you kind of have to have a constraint that you can only have either or, so that you don't have weird situations where you have like, the view definition in line as well as other things, or maybe you don't care. Yeah, so there's all those sorts of edge cases that kind of need to think about as well.
That's interesting. Let me check. Can parameter resource have a contained resources? So it's called parameters, and it's inherited directly from resource, and resource doesn't have contained, so there is no way to put contained into parameters like in FHIR. So
right, okay. Yeah, I think the closest thing to this is probably like value set expand, because we want it to be consistent with the way other things do it.
Yeah, it is very similar to terminology API. Yeah.
So in value set expand, you might give it a URL, or you might give it a value set. We're slightly different in that we're talking about having multiple sort of references. Interestingly, in value set expand, I don't think there is any constraints. It's just kind of however you decide to interpret, if you pass both or neither, or and then you pass a version as well, which is a bit weird. So maybe we shouldn't totally copy value set expand, but
yeah, I agree. But we end up with a very similar pattern. Yes, they call URI if you refers value set, and they use the value set parameter to send the body of the value set to expand. Yeah, good analogy. Yeah, so we can rename, like we may call it view definition and URL, because we end up with the similar stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. And the response of the value set, it's a parameters themselves. Yeah, but we are not gonna copy the response. Yeah, this is a good idea. Yeah, probably we can name. So that for us, the only change to rename the parameter to URI. And in value set, you only have one URI. Yeah, but for run operation, it will be exactly like this, like just one parameter. But for the export operation, it's gonna be one. You can send multiple parameters.
Yeah, so like multiple value sets.
Like multiple value sets. But for run operation, it's only because we should stream the result synchronously, so it should be only one. But for export, gonna be an array of collection of references or bodies.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we can send the value set definition in the request for all the operations, because I
Yep.
don't think it's practical for servers to know about value sets ahead of time in all cases. Yeah. So that sounds good to me.
Okay, I will rename parameter to URL.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm planning to, for dev days, like work on a like next draft for API. I will probably share it a little bit before, but so I think that we will talk about, I will merge run and evaluate operation into just run operation, and I will describe export operation.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, I'm hoping that we can move on to just trying to implement like a little proof of concept of this soon. I'm just trying to shrug off this project that I've been working on, but it sounds good. I've kind of had a look, and from what you've said, it sounds good so far. So
I'm in the same boat as John, Nikolai. I've been keep on getting dragged into some projects, but this is on my to-do list to implement.
Yeah, let's probably like FHIR Lab will like push us a little
It
bit.
might.
So
It could
and
be
then-
it could be a good forcing function for us, you know. If he has 3 implementations to hook up, then
yeah.
that would be good.
As well, I still have in my roadmap to sit down and refactor ViewDefinition builder to use the API. So then maybe I will even share it with the FHIR Lab. I don't know. Let's see. It's written in Clojure. Maybe you write and just JavaScript, and Brian can build in the ViewDefinition builder into. But there is like some smart part with which guys are built about like FHIR pass out of completion. I don't know how easy it can be integrated with Brian's stuff, but we may have two tools, like eventually they can merge into one. Okay,
hey,
I will work on this. Yeah, then we can jump to your topics, John.
okay. Let me just share my screen. Just double check that looks all right. No, system settings doesn't matter. So I'll explain it. Sorry,
Okay.
I got a new laptop. So the FirePath subset, it's a little bit ambiguous, I think. So it talks about supporting literals or string, integer, and decimal only. Unfortunately, we actually don't stick to this in the tests, and we have some tests that, for example, include date literals and that sort of stuff. And perhaps we haven't picked this up because many of our implementations use, for example, FirePath.js or some more capable FirePath functionality that sort of just uses, like, say, dates anyway. So I think we might need to decide whether we want to support dates. But the other thing is that it kind of says that you must implement literals, but then it's a bit silent on whether you need to implement those types more broadly. So there's things like Boolean operators, math operators, comparison operators. Do you need to implement those for just string, integer, and decimal types? So, and do you need to implement them for non-literal things as well? And I think we might even have some tests which cross over into non-literal stuff that involves these operators. So I think there's a little bit of ambiguity there that we might need to iron out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's also these UCOM value comparisons. You know, 1 week versus 8 day. You know, is 8 days greater than 1 week? As an example, I think that's another thing we might want to specify.
Yeah. So in our implementation, we implement a bunch more FirePath, of course. So that's kind of one sort of dimension of functionality. We also implement terminology functions. So that's another thing. And then, yeah, the quantity stuff, I think, is maybe a third thing. And the terminology and the quantity stuff, there's a bit of implementation complexity in that. I can actually see those as being either unofficial or official profiles, potentially, like as sort of an optional additional functionality. And yeah, then the fire path thing, I think we kind of need to nail down the subset a little bit more. And we also might need to think about, yeah, what all that additional fire path functionality, like, yeah, what do we do with it? And like, so in Pathling, we're sort of looking at, you know, do we have kind of like a strict mode, you know, like, so if you turn it on, it will kind of tell you that you're straying into like non-interoperable land, that sort of thing. And do we package some of our stuff up into sort of unofficial profiles so that you can tell people that you're, for example, using and relying on, you know, terminology functionality or like, yeah, quantity / stuff.
It would be nice to have some formal description of this subset. I'm thinking what could be the formal description of the subset. Well, if we're talking about functions, it is simple. You're just saying, do you support this function, yeah, or not? So then operator, you should describe what operators you support and what data types.
Well, we could have a cut down grammar. So the actual FirePath spec has an ANTLR grammar, right? So we could cut that down and say, look, this is like the grammar that we're talking about.
There's the grammar, and then there's the list of functions that are, the functions themselves I don't think are in the grammar. Yeah, they're in the spec.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, the functions and the behavior, yeah, sometimes. And the grammar is not very good way to put people understand what's possible. There's a lot of stuff going on after parsing.
Today, all we're saying in FirePath, I'm looking at it, FirePath functionality, we just say you have to support get resource key and get reference key. I think that's it.
Yeah, and then so in the base profile, if you implement the base profile, you're unconstrained as to what you can implement. You have to implement get resource, get reference key, but then if you want it to be a shareable view definition, you have to make sure you stick to the subset, right? So I guess what we were thinking is to do it as like layering on of constraints, right? So if you're just, you know, working with, if you're just working in your own sort of little ecosystem and you want to have full expressiveness of any sort of fire path, then that's fine. But if you want to share it more broadly with a really broad set of implementations, then we defined a lower bar that's easier to implement and to be consistent. And that's what the FirePath subset is. So if you click on the shareable view definition thing, that's like the additional set of constraints that make it easier for them to be interoperable if you use those constraints. But I think that yeah, it's just I think there's a few gaps in this. And is it the right, is it a little bit too minimal in some respects? You know, like, yeah, probably the first one is maybe dates, but there might be a couple of other little things that might be sort of not quite intuitive to not have them there. But we'll write it up in detail, I think, and we can have a chat about it.
It would be nice to still split it into a set of features and combinations, and then let the server say what features of FirePath are supported, and then build this subset from these features. But what could be you saying, like grammar, how we can?
I totally agree with you that the grammar doesn't do it. I mean, the grammar would probably answer questions like around types, but I think it's only really a tool to help communicate part of it. And it's also something that we need to maintain and that needs to be correct and all the rest of it. I was just, you know, when you said we need a formal way, but the other sort of things that we've been talking about is like these sort of feature definitions and that sort of thing, which might be another way. I'm not sure. We still have to kind of describe it unambiguously. Another way to sort of tighten it up would be to kind of maybe make the spec a little bit more structured and reference parts of it from within tests, just to make sure there's like a really strong linkage, because I think there's tests that are currently outside of it, even though they're declaring it to be shareable. So if we could sort of break down what are the features depended upon by this test and sort of reference them, then that might tighten it up a little bit. Yeah, those are the ideas that come to mind immediately.
Yeah, the tests as a definition, maybe like as a formal definition, maybe good way as well. But I think somebody should spend some time and try to express what means to like describe features of FHIR. Then we can. For me, another problem that what I'm thinking is that like shareable, it's a set and it will change with the time. Yeah, so people will need some extra functions, and we will probably it should be somehow formally described. So this included, this is like optional, and we can easily write this test probably for all these functions and like features of FHIR. But the question how to describe it formally.
I think functions are the easiest part, actually. There's more tricky parts, like so if you have like the comparison operator, what type of operands do you support?
Yeah, but
for
if we
that
will talk
comparison?
about like typed operators, we may say these operators, like we may distinguish like plus operator for strings and say this is a string plus, this is a decimal plus, this is a datetime plus, and say, I mean, name like use typed operators in a specification and say that we like recommend you at least support these typed operators, but those are optional. Like plus for datetimes probably can be optional, yeah, because it's hard to implement. But the plus for the string or the like numbers, it is non-optional. So that's we have operators, we have functions. Operators can be solved with the typed operators. What else? So we have a like macro, which are not functions, like where function, and I don't know how deep you can write this where. Yes, so like levels. This is not obvious, but this is probably like hard for some implementers to do the recursive grammars. Yes. So
Yeah.
what else? So we
The
can
UCOM conversions.
yeah, UCOM conversion, but the UCOM conversion, it's usually so it is implicit. Yeah. So you may say like take this element and add the 1 week or something like this, or in comparison you may use the UCOM stuff. Yeah. The UCOM, yeah. So it's not just UCOM. You may say like even like specific UCOM parts. Yeah, UCOM for dates, we may think separately.
Yep. Calendar durations.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I see that we can easily write a test for that, but it would be nice to have some way to describe, like build this table of FHIR features, give them names or numbers, and then we can like attach the test to each of them.
Interestingly, in the 5-part spec, it says, this is the formal syntax. If there are discrepancies between the documentation and the grammar is considered the source of truth.
Okay.
Not sure if there are discrepancies, but possibly. The other thing that we've kind of been grappling with, and I'm not sure if I've 100% got my thoughts together on this, but I'm just sort of foreshadowing it, is the whole, and I know that there are gaps here, but the whole interoperability aspect of column types and output type hints. So we've talked a little bit about type hints, like can an implementation sort of provide like an ANSI SQL type to influence the output format? And the other part is for the shareable view definition, you have to specify a column type on each column, and then this needs to be checked against the type of each column. I think there's maybe some semantic gaps in this as well, because what we've said is that you specify the column type as a FHIR type. But the problem with that is that not all FHIR expressions have a FHIR type. So you can have like just say a FHIR string, And that's actually just a fire path string. It's not a fire string or a URL or an OID or anything like that. So, and we don't really have a formal mapping in the spec, I don't think. Well, maybe there kind of is in the fire spec, but that kind of felt like a bit of a gap.
The fire path spec has its own namespace, right? The system namespace. Wouldn't they map to those? Or...
Yeah, so I guess, so if I say my column is an OID, right? Do I then go to the fire path page of the fire spec and see that OID maps to a fire path string and then say, okay, well then it's okay for there to be a literal fire path string in that field because it maps? Is that what I do?
And what the value, I'm still trying to remember, what the value to specify the output fire type?
I think the reason that we required that in the shareable view definition is because implementations are not necessarily type aware.
Yeah, just like a hint for implementation. But the problem, and when it's needed. So I'm just trying to understand. So when implementation really need this information. So let's say I'm extracting datetime and I'm putting into database or like CSV. Why do I need this information? What the result? Just to check and like.
You're mapping it to like a Parquet file, right?
Okay, so people don't have to analyze the fire path to understand what the output type, so they can like trust that the output type will be like this.
Yeah, I'd have to go back into our implementation, but I think what we did, what we did is we ran the fire path evaluator, and that returns not only a fire path expression, but also type information. And we support both the system namespace and the fire namespace, and then each of those get mapped to Parquet types.
But the idea that the implementation can read this hint and use a mapping table to understand how to output the result.
Right, but I think what John was saying was, I mean, we've hard coded these in our implementation, but John is saying, well, maybe those need to be, or somebody might want to override those default mappings. Is that what you're saying, John?
Yeah, so I just thought about another dimension to it. I realize I'm just kind of throwing stuff at you here without many answers, but the other thing is defaults. So, and I think these things interrelate. So getting back to tags again. So a tag is a hint on what the output should be. And maybe if we get this right, we don't need mandatory column types. I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about it too much. But if you don't specify a tag, then what is there like a sensible default in terms of ANSI SQL at least? So is it correct that I could run? Is it correct that I could run like AidBox and have a date time column, and it come out as a native datetime out of AidBox? But if I run it on Pathlink, maybe it comes out as a string. But we implement like
the question: what is native datetime? It is native for Postgres. Is it native for Parquet or what? There is no notion what native datetime, and the fire datetime is kind of problematic, because you always have to fix when you're mapping this to database data types or you're mapping to runtime data types, because it partial dates and fire allow it, but like most of languages and databases do not support this.
Well, I mean, there's SQL types, right?
Yeah.
Is there a sort of and you can hint it, right? So you could say, no, I absolutely want this as a string. What does that mean? But if I don't tell it, should there be like some consistent behavior? So should we kind of at least have a mapping from, say, fire types or fire path types to default ANSI SQL types, so that there's more consistent behavior if you don't hint it? And if you hint it, then you can kind of override it, because I think that's the point of the hints, right? Is that you can tell it what you would prefer. But at the moment, like it's kind of wide open. So implementations kind of just have to work out what the right default is, even if they are SQL implementations, and there could be a way of sort of, saying a sensible SQL default.
Yeah, I agree. And we probably can think about like using ANSI types because ANSI is a standard. Can we introduce and provide like mapping table and let the people to, if it is connected to our query resource potentially in future, if we say that you can write ANSI, then the types should be ANSI types, like of the columns, yeah?
Yeah, and we've kind of done a mapping like this in Parquet on FHIR, but for like a slightly different purpose. And there's kind of so one way to do it is you could put out like a FHIR date time string, and so that's one way. Or you could say that this date time is, and that's probably more safe as a default in a way, because once you start getting into like native types, then you've got things like date times with and without time zones, instance timestamps, all this sort of stuff, and they're potentially lossy and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I was just thinking about that, but I feel like after this conversation, we need to have another look at this, and maybe it can actually be simplified a little bit. Like if we get the output type thing right, maybe this kind of resolves the column type thing. But I think there's a little bit of a gap in the column type at the moment, just because, yeah, to implement it, you kind of need to be FHIR type aware, and have a mapping all the way back. Maybe that's okay, but not sure. Something to think about.
Yeah,
We'll try and write it up
definition
properly.
is kind of abstract, yes. So let's list what could be the outputs, yes. So you can output into CSV, then you have just strings and numbers. So, and probably booleans, yes. So just 3 types, or maybe like JSON inside CSV, yeah. Or it could be Parquet, which has its own type system, and which is even extensible, yeah. So you can define your types, or it could be like specific database data types, like Postgres or something else. And we probably can build this table of different types and suggest how they could be mapped to the to the FHIR types.
Yeah, and I'm not, and I don't think I know that you can't implement all SQL types within any output type, but it's still kind of a hint. And this was actually the only sort of part that didn't really work interoperability wise when we did this, when we did the paper and we did it on AidBox and Pathling, is what we ended up with is we ran the same ViewDefinition on both implementations, and we ran the same SQL, but we had to cast because there was no way actually ensuring that we got consistent types to run the same SQL over it. So I think the goal is that we can run the same SQL over the view result from multiple implementations. So we're trying to give people who write the view definitions the tools to make sure that you can do that.
Yeah, I agree. But if it's like at the end we want to run the same SQL, like going with the ANSI SQL data types is the right way, I think, because then you can, like most of databases doing this mapping by themselves, so you can go to documentation and read so how they can be mapped to ANSI SQL, what are extensions.
Yeah, that's right, and that sort of fits the theme of leveraging what's already there. So you mentioned Parquet, there's already well-established ways of, representing ANSI SQL types in Parquet, and that's what Spark SQL does. So, and even things like CSV, there's, pretty, you can, there's obviously different ways to do that, but at least if you have a SQL type as an intent, you've got a better chance of doing that in a
Yeah.
consistent way, even if it is lower fidelity than, say, a full relational database.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so
this-
that's just kind of some of the stuff we've been discovering.
Uh-huh. But what do you think? Should we introduce another type element, like ANSI SQL type, something like this, or use the tags?
I don't know yet. I think first we should really articulate the problem, and then create a well thought out solution to it. It might not need any creation. It might just need a clarification on the meaning of things that are already there. So, and that I think that would probably be preferable. We've already got tags there. I don't think we've really implemented them. I think they probably could be used for this, but we probably need more wording in the spec around the actual semantics of that, and potentially like a mapping and defaults and that sort of thing, for it to all work. At the moment, we're kind of just saying, yeah, you can provide it if you like. You can use this form for ANSI SQL types. And we don't really say anything else. And I think we probably need to say a bit more. And we also need to analyze how this relates to the requirement for column types in the shareable view definition. Does this cover it off? Were there other reasons that we had that it goes beyond just the inference of column types? I'm just trying to cast my mind back and think through that, but we might need to get Ryan back onto the call to help us remember that.
Quick question. So two thoughts. One is you mentioned a paper that you guys published on this. I'm kind of playing a little bit of catch up on this. Can you guys share the link? And then the other thought I have is how much of this, and I'm kind of thinking more on the policy side, but how much of this would be relevant to some of the feedback on the CMS RFI that, you know, we should be, that's out for comment, where it would be worth thinking about what needs to be done within the FHIR spec to make it usable for analytics. Because if you can't really use the data and convert it for analytics, it's kind of a bit of a, you know, I think industry's sort of missing the point. Like, I think, you know, that's what's intriguing about this group to me is, you know, you guys are thinking about some of the more technical, tough questions to, you know, ultimately make the data usable. But anyways, I feel like I kind of pivoted us a little bit, but just want to throw that out there.
So I can certainly point you towards a preprint, and in terms of the paper. With respect to the CMS RFI, would you mind just expanding on what that is a little bit for those of us who aren't as familiar with it?
Yeah, so gosh, it was during the FHIR Connectathon. HHS dropped like a sort of just a bomb of content. Let me see what I can share. And I'm just starting to get into this. CMS RFI. I mean, this probably isn't the best link. Comments due June 16th. Let me just drop this in for now. I'll do some more digging because I got pulled into it for my org. But yeah, it's basically they're just, you know, what are the industry bottlenecks? What do we need, you know, to do to, you know, advance the FHIR spec, you know, so it's pretty broad and wide in terms of what they're asking, but certainly what you guys are thinking about and what you're trying to address is, I would say, probably underrepresented in terms of industry and its importance relative to sort of policy.
Okay, so this is kind of like seeking public feedback on how we could make FHIR more useful.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of a rough high level way of putting it. I mean, they sort of cover everything in the kitchen sink, so it's a bit atypical short comment period. So I don't know. My apologies if it's out of scope for what you guys are doing, but just figured I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, it's probably not. I haven't had a look at it. I wasn't really aware of it, but yeah, perhaps I should get up to speed on this.
Yeah, I mean, if we're meeting next week, I should be a little bit more caught up on this because I just got pulled into it on the BWell side, so I'll be a lot more informed. I just know it dropped during the Connectathon, not the Connectathon, but during the HL7 meeting, and it's literally covers almost all things interoperability from a US basis. So I'm just getting ready to dig into it and start doing some commenting. Josh Mandel also did a nice write up on I'll see if I can find it on LinkedIn that he dropped and put some stuff around GitHub to sort of collect and aggregate comments. So almost all the major FHIR accelerators, US based, are looking at it, talking about it, and getting ready to comment on it. So anyways, yeah, again, my apologies if it's if I've taken us off topic.
I think we might have gotten to the end of the official stuff today anyway. I'm just wondering if we could maybe end the recording and just a couple more minutes if you want to hang on the line.
Yeah, the problem, my can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, but my laptop is like hangs. I could not switch the screen. I just jumped to see how AMOP treated the problem. And I think like AMOP just using ANSI types. Just getting back to what we discussed, yeah. Yeah, but sorry, I could not like stop recording because something happened with my laptop. I can try to yeah, I really just my screen is frozen, so but
Oh no.
Yeah, that's I don't know what's happening with Mac. But can you stop the recording or not?
I think whoever's running the meeting can kick if you want to stop the recording, can kick the note taker out.
Okay, let me try to rejoin quickly.
Well, I think if John's the host, he could, well.
I am the host.
Yeah, so you can kick out Nikolai's note taker.
No, I am the host now. I wasn't a second ago, so yes.